Macaronic Songs. I'm going to begin with the first one I ever heard, although I didn't know the word macaronic. And it was at Halloween, and I was about 10 or 11 years of age, and an old school friend and neighbour, a Gaelic speaking, did this as his party piece when we were all disguised. I once had a girlfriend, she came from Crowmore. She was a darling, galore. She was a darling like Marilyn Monroe, but she gave me the bachel to come back no more. The night that I met her, it was on the bus, coming from Stornoway Saturday night. She sat down beside me, I gave her a light. She horsed you, darling, I hold me tight. And that is all I can remember. I don't think there was more. But of course, he had to remove his disguise because people knew him by his voice. But what was unusual about it was that he really didn't sing English songs. And we all went to school in Stornoway, 3 miles away. That was a much more sophisticated place than the rural areas where Gaelic speakers they weren't really held in great esteem in those days. It's changed since then, thank goodness. So that was the first one. And then I just thought at the time it was for amusement. That's why you did 2 languages and sort of to make fun of ourselves. The next one I heard was at a céilí. By that, I mean a fireside visit, with quite frequent occurrences in our house on a Friday or a Saturday night when my parents, both musicians, would have friends in till the late hours and they would sing. There was always somebody who would have something amusing among it all. I don't have a recording of it, and nor did I know it was a child ballad. I didn't know what that was, but looking through the archives of the School of Scottish Studies, I see that Hamish Henderson recorded that very song in 1965, a little later than when I first heard it. It doesn't name the singer on that recording, but it sounds a bit like a Peter Stewart, a travelling man from Gairloch. So here he is singing the song.
As I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the lobby a gentleman's coat despising, whose coat is this boys and whose can it be? It's only a blanket, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. With buttons on a blanket and I can do the Rio. I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the lobby a gentleman stick a spy, saying, whose stick is this, me boys, and whose can it be? It's only a porridge stick, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. But I serve a mounted porridge stick, and I can do the Rio. I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the bedroom, a gentleman a spy, saying, what man is this, me boys, and who can he be? It's only a baby, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. Oh, she make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. But whiskers on a baby, and asking to the Rio. I came home the next night, in late came I. There in the lobby a gentleman's horse is by, saying, whose horse is this, my boys, and whose can it be? It's only a milking cow, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a hew me, Sergeant Romeo. But I saddle on a milking cow, and I can do the Rio.
The interesting thing to me is that, well, there's great evidence that he, or whoever made it, heard it also in Scots, because in the very last verse, he's the English parts are in English. When I came home the first night, home late came I. Except that last verse when he says, when I came home the first night, hame late came I. And of course, that's probably what was heard in the first place. But it's fun. we can laugh. So it's quite easy to put it into the other language just for a little bit of sport. Now, the one that was probably most popular in Gaeldom was one that began life in Glasgow. In Glasgow, there were, when I was a student in the 60s, there were over 10,000 Gaels. And they, on a Friday and a Saturday night, and occasionally other nights, they would gather for a dance and a ceilidh at the Highlanders Institute. And there was always somebody who did a comic turn. There was a band, there was dancing. It was a light-hearted night. And this was one that turned up quite often. And I'll let you hear, first of all, the first recording I came across, although I'd heard it in Skye, I'd heard it in Lewis, and it was fairly popular. This was from a Tobermory man from Mull, and he has a story about who made it. In fact, he doesn't get that right, but let's listen to him singing it anyway.
When I came to Glasgow first, the Macaronic and Gowl. Oh, I was like a man adrift in Imroch Stolly Howl. The noise it seemed like thunder, could I twan lead them town, and oftentimes I wished I were a lashin' teen bound. No, I am like a Dramwa car was rambling in my ears. Their Hamishias and Brummelaw, my eyes were full of tears. Make you grow, me an ash in my dear native home. Us through a neat a gale of me in a Glasgow all alone. Sna fijanich, sna pojanich, that met me on my way. And Dodgen and had cost the room, they had a lot to say. But could you gear it, I get them when I said clear away. Ach, we had the mach a shakerum, and nasty things did say. Och, shit, this was my natter, sir, my temper it got wild. Schimishiers goes gappagiat along the banks of Clyde. Hoy me grey me gowl, and I swung them round my head. Could the hillock me the Administratiga, and they picked them up as dead.
In fact, the song was written by a Clyde Bank man, William or Billy William Marshall, and he was born and would have been brought up in Clyde Bank, but for the war. In 1939, so many were evacuated, and if they had relatives on an island or in the Highlands, that's where they went. And Billy Marshall spent his war years in Skye, and as was the case with quite a number, they heard mostly Gaelic in the early 40s. That was the predominant language. And this one, he returned to Glasgow, which from the song, he had a lifelong love of Glasgow, of the city, but and he recorded it, but not until 1987. Anyhow, we can hear the rest of the song as sung by Neil MacDonald from Tobermory.
Annexin, a Polish man, oh, a splendid man was he. Dunyagas, the space shelter belonging to Portree. Host Jerome of Arcanage, what is all this row? Yes, rumor council, and I will tell you how. Hashik Miri Shiga, he had heard the likes before. Stringa Fitri Helpanach, who stood at the pub door. Hookamach Leor, and pretended out to ride. The Hashik ain't on a loch, and the lowlanders to fight. Vanna divorce for me, Kangaram, to be in such a fix. A hostja von Chicago, you'll have to stop those tricks. Follows Najian, Alechka Prach, just treat them with disdain. Look a king, Jacuya Musas, if you'll do the likes again. Hook me tank a Kriaga, and went upon my way. I'm a clear on machine, I'm in Glasgow till this day. Sanyaga, Kakola, how I know my Glasgow well. Sana Kainas Borim Honyasni, High ever more shall dwell.
And the song is very consistent in how the lines are created, the first half being Gaelic. But interesting to me, anyhow, is that a lot of the English lines have a literal translation from Gaelic, as if just to make gentle fun of how the Gael forms a sentence. The pronouns and verbs are in a different order to what they are in English. So you get and pretended down to right, or the Lowlanders, where you would normally expect how John MacDonald started to fight the Lowlanders, but it's the Lowlanders to fight. But there's also, I think, a little hint that the police were on their side. There was a lot of Gaelic-speaking policemen, partly because when there was little money on the islands or jobs, any of the young men who were over 6 feet tall were encouraged to join the police, and one had to be over 6 feet tall in those days. So there was quite a number of them. Just treat them with disdain. Don't go fighting them. Just treat them with disdain and assume a superiority. That's quite difficult for the Gael to do, having been a bit crushed for generations. Now I'm going to move across the Atlantic. There was wave after wave of emigration among the Gaelic-speaking Highlanders. Not just the post-Culloden, but the potato famine from 1846, and in between as well. And I myself emigrated to Canada, actually just to study folklore. So I lived there for 9 years. And in St. John's, studying folklore, I began to make my way to the west coast, where there was a Gaelic-speaking community. And they had left the island of Canna and Moidart, that's Canna, just south of Skye, now owned by the National Trust. And although everybody spoke Gaelic by the time I visited in 1968, yet when the oldest of the Gaels were talking about their memories, this man, for example, had a lot of songs, but he found it difficult to speak English throughout a narration because it was so embedded in his own past. So I'll just let you hear a little bit of his voice speaking. Oops, I didn't catch that voice. Well, let me just read it. You can leave in Skye today and be home again tomorrow. But it took, when my people came out, the Macaronics, it took them 7 weeks on the boat, and the rest is in Gaelic. But he had numbers of old songs. This is the area they settled on the west coast of Newfoundland. And when they arrived in the 1830s, their neighbours, they were already there, and it was a very, had very little in the way of civilization, or should I say modern ways of living. It had been partly settled by the French, who were cleared with the Acadians from Nova Scotia. And there was some English speakers who had been fishermen who jumped ship, or boat builders who'd gone ashore to set up a boat yard and mend vessels that were over for the codfish. And they were in the hilly areas beyond the farming part. There were quite a number of Mi'kmaq Indians who had come from Cape Breton. So there they were, a mixed group. And if you look at the aerial photo, it's along the banks of the Great Codrive River. And the Trans-Canada Highway wasn't completed, didn't go past that area and connect to that area till 1966. That's quite late on, 2 years before I arrived. So it was still very much, it was possible to catch the way it had been for a long time. And the road signs give a bit of a hint. Loch Leven, Highlands, and the Loch Lomond, St. Andrews. I would say they were very, very different to the ones on the other side of the ocean. Nevertheless, a connection to Scotland. And when they were working on the land, the neighbours helped each other. They socialized together. They realized quite early on that to make a go of things in that community, they would need to get on with their neighbours, and certain tasks were done communally. And this one here was a song that was quite often used at the last stage of the wool, the cloth making. There was quite a number of weavers, and so finishing the cloth, the way they finish Harris tweed, the shrinking at the end, and this is how they did it. Whoops, they sang so that everyone there could join in, because everybody had at least a smattering of English. So this is this song, Will You Marry Me?
Will you marry me, my bonny fair lassie? Will you marry me, my damsel? Answer me, my bonny fair lassie. Sat about me heen and gowro. Me heen is in gall, it matting to Donny, clean of a cow agus tired. It doesn't any leap as a make it a screep of how I that grow at the highlands. Will you marry me, my bonny fair lassie? Will you marry me, my damsel? Answer me, my bonny fair lassie. Sat about me heen and gowro. Kan je just een draast agus me en van, boot jou wat je wants dat je nou. Me heet just aan de just can go for hele fair, just because you back now why for that drown.
There'll be a little glass in your hand, and this reference to a full cask is not unusual, because in fact nearly all the social activities where there was a little glass in your hand and maybe more than one, they actually distilled it themselves. And even in the 60s, yes, probably the 70s too, there was quite a few illicit stills around. I dare say they existed in the Highlands, but I didn't see any in my own upbringing in Skye and Lewis, but I did see them there. But just to give you another idea of how when they got together, the film of this it's not terribly clear, but there's several other voices here. They're at the milling table, and there are all of their hands on the cloth. And Frank MacArthur, whom you just heard, son of Alan, the first person we met, he leads the thing with a milling song, and it's another macaronic.
That's the way we used to be. You're funny, you're bright, you're handsome and polite. You know you are so very nice. I don't intend to marry you. I ain't going to go be not at all in fun with you. I mean, from the passenger, that's the way we used to be.
And on it went, and when that one would finish, another one would begin. Let's look at the song. Chalin Gwyn mean brown-haired maiden since you left me, and he got it from his father. And it's got a macaronic chorus, but all the verses are in English. So at the milling table, or the luach, as we'd call it, shrinking the cloth, people would sing whatever lines they wished. The soloist would generally sing the verses, and everybody the chorus. Quite a number of years after I recorded this, I think twice actually, once in 1970 and then again in 1975, from Emily Lyle was completing the last volume of the Greg Duncan collection, and she had what she called a rag bag of scraps of paper that sort of didn't fit anywhere in the previous category. So she was spreading them around. Did anybody make anything of this? I would have to credit my son Martin, who, the minute he looked at it, he said, "Do I know what that is?" And he referred back to having heard this one here. And it's "Money a race that I have won." Now, this one, it's got similar verses. But if you listen to the nonsense syllable chorus this had, it's no other Ricky Toodum or any of those bothy ballads that's the area it was found. It's got a sound all of its own. But keep your eye on it, and I'll sing you the Gaelic macaronic one. Machalin going van gago me, not at all in fun with thee. I me howl and brash and jay, and that's the way we used to be. If I had wings like a dove, I would fly the air above. I would go and see my lover left me dull this evening. So in fact, there's quite a strong link to each side of the Atlantic. I eventually found somebody in Harris who had a short version of Frank MacArthur's. Now, whichever way it travelled, nobody seems to know. But so the jury is out on that one. But suffice it to say, songs travel fast. If it's something that people like, got a good chorus or swing to it, then it'll soon take off and pick up somewhere else. So if I say that, remind you that Frank's family emigrated in the 1830s. And of course, it was not quite a century later, but almost a good 80 years later, that this song was collected in the northeast of Scotland. At that table and singing the odd line was this woman here. You might have, well, a little faint picture of her. She was a very good weaver, so she would bring her cloth to be shrunk. And I asked her, do you go on plan to sing a song in French? Or, oh, everybody will sing. There'll be French, there'll be Gaelic, there'll be English songs. And in fact, it's the only place I've ever come across it. Never saw it in Nova Scotia, and certainly not in Scotland. But because this strong community of the four languages, and haven't come across any Mi'kmaq songs, but I'd have come across Gaelic-speaking Mi'kmaqs in Nova Scotia. And so this is Lucy, but she's singing while she's spinning. And as she explained, we made everything we wore, she said, and then began to sing.
Demain va vous chanter une chanson menterie. S'il y a une parole de vérité, je veux pas de la vie. Mourir for taddly-den, mourir for taddly-day. Mourir for taddly-den, and run 4 times a day. J'ai pris ma charrue sur mon dos, mes 2 bœufs sur ma tête. Je m'en étais, oui, labouré, jusqu'à n'y avait pas de terre. Mourir for taddly-den, and mourir for taddly-day. Mourir for taddly-den, and run 4 times a day.
You can picture, they all sang the rum 4 times a day. That was a pretty popular, at least the 4 times a day might not have been spaced out regularly. There was certainly at these céilís they had. And the weaving and the spinning, it was, I wouldn't need, I think, to play this part where Lucy explains where she learned to spin and to weave. The French were very good weavers as well, and the old-fashioned looms they had. So the songs, again, totally central to that. I want to take you now to Quebec, to the Canton d'Est, the Eastern Townships. This was settled a little later, during the potato famine, 1846 to 56, by people from the Isle of Lewis, Harris, and North Uist. And when I went there in 1975, this is a sign that was outside the town of Stornoway, same name of the place I went to school for 6 years. Stornoway-vous-Accueil. No Gaelic speakers left, and there was only one English speaker there. But looking closely at the map of what it was like 100 years before that, Stornoway, these names, Tulsta, Galston, Dell, Milan, not Milan, but Ness, these are names that occur in the Hebridean of Scotland. And there are 1 or 2 Macaronic songs. This one is part of a longer song, just a few lines sprinkled in there. It was a story of misadventure of somebody who was going home at night and, against advice, crossed a lake or a pond that was frozen, but not quite as strong the ice as it should have been. And the ice cracked and they had a narrow escape. Late last night and try knew my cutter vanished out of view and left me in an awful stew just 10 miles from my boarding house. There was a bard in the area by the name of Angus Mackay, who was a prolific writer. There was quite a number of bards, and he began to write in English, but then his Macaronic songs had very little Gaelic, but nevertheless, there was one which lamented that they were losing the language because they were all they would go down to Boston if they thought they might make a living. And his rhyme was, lads and lasses in their teens, wearing airs of kings and queens, just the taste of Boston beans makes them lose their Gaelic. They come back with finer clothes, speaking Yankee through the nose. That's the way the Gaelic goes. Pop goes the Gaelic. And so this is how it was. They lost their Gaelic quite, but those Macaronic songs were a big part of keeping the language from one generation to the next.